Hello and welcome to the Personality Politics podcast, the show where we go beyond the policies and party lines to explore the people behind the power. I'm your host Tom Lane, and in each episode we'll take a closer look at the character, motivations and personal journeys that shape political life. Today's episode is all about understanding the individual behind the public role, what drives someone to enter politics, how do their personal views influence the decisions they make, and who are they when their cameras are off. I'm joined today by former Conservative MP Stephen Metcalfe. We'll be talking about his time in Parliament, the experiences that defined his political career, and the personal traits that helped him navigate the pressures of public life. So whether you're here for political insight or human stories, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. First of all, Stephen, thank you very much for joining me on the very first episode of the Personality Politics podcast. How are you doing? How you been?
Yeah, great, thank you. And honoured to be the first on the podcast. Looking forward to our discussion and really pleased that you contacted me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining me. I want to have a conversation a little bit more about you. So we're going to find out maybe more than you've let on previously about who you are. So be mildly afraid. It is recorded as well, but I think it should be pretty straightforward. First of all, my understanding is you grew up in Walthamstow?
Born in Walthamstow. I lived in Loughton. Well, that's where I came back to and lived there most of my early life until I bought a flat, funnily enough, back in Walthamstow, back in 1984. And then got married and subsequently moved around and then ended up back in Loughton, which is where I am now.
What were you like growing up as a youngster? Were you one of the cool kids or were you someone in the background?
Definitely a cool kid. No, I don't know. I think if you were to ask people who knew me quite early on, they'd say I was quite precocious. So I was quite chatty and extrovert, I suppose, as a child. For anyone who's ever heard me speak politically, well, one of the stories I tell is about my first election being in 1974, when I was 8 years old and I stood in my class primary school mock election as the Conservative candidate. Needless to say, I didn't win because the other parties were promising free sweets and longer holidays, all the goodies, and they seemed to trump me talking about the 3-day week and power cuts and shopping by candlelight. So, I mean, that is an indication of what I was like as a child. But then, of course, I wasn't obsessed with politics. It's just that I'd been introduced to it at a very young age through my parents. But by the time, I was reached mid to late teens, I was more interested in the opposite sex than I was in politics.
Were they political, your parents? Were they interested in the political scene? Did they get involved in it? What was the...
Yeah, so my father, the reason we ended up down in Loughton in Epping Forest was that my parents met through politics. They were both party agents and they met in Manchester. And then my father was looking for a better job and applied for the job to be John Biggs Davidson's agent down in Epping Forest. And so he packed up his pregnant wife, pregnant with me, and down they moved in late 65, down to live in a flat above the Conservative office in the High Road, Loughton. And so that's how I grew up in a political environment. Having an MP round quite a lot didn't strike me as odd, hence I ended up standing in the 1974 election as an 8-year-old. But I enjoyed the theatre and the drama of politics, as opposed to the obsessive with the policy stuff, which was probably a bit young for all that. And it wasn't really until I got into stopped being interested in politics or enjoying it, but it wasn't until probably my early to mid-20s that I got properly involved again and started supporting other people and campaigning and being involved in the party, as it were.
Did the fact that your parents were involved in the political scene, did that make you want to get into politics, or did that make you want to avoid politics like the plague?
It's a good question. I suppose I wanted to be involved in politics. I could see the difference that people involved in politics made and knew them as individuals as well as politicians. But I'm going to be honest and didn't think that I had either the skills or the background. The people who were politicians at that time, members of Parliament, didn't look like me. They didn't have my background of going to a fairly standard primary school here in Loughton and living in a flat above the office. It didn't seem to fit. And for a long time, I pursued things that might be useful if I were ever to get involved in politics, never thinking I was going to be able to do it. until, of course, eventually you just keep doing stuff. You get elected as a councillor, and then someone says, well, why don't you apply to get onto the list and become a member of Parliament? And that's really how it happened. And so I grew into believing I could do it, although I suspect it was an aspiration all the way back to, as I said, back to 1974 when I stood as the candidate.
So I guess you were technically within politics while you were still within your mother's belly. You were still in the political scene before being born, which is quite unique.
Yes, yeah, I think that is true. And yeah, so politics was always around us in one form or another. I mean, my mother started her own business just after I was born, and my father gave up being the agent here in Epping Forest early 70s, 72, I think, and joined my mother in the family business. So by early 70s, they weren't actively working in politics, but politics was part of all our lives.
Obviously, you mentioned standing for election at the age of 8 years old. I wonder if there's, I mean, the answer might just be no, but was there anything learned in that process that maybe has accidentally stuck with you?
Well, possibly. Only that the other parties always promise the freebies and the goodies, and we try and be more sensible. Well, that's certainly what I've thought over the years. No, not really. Politics, it felt brutal at the time, and it still feels brutal when you lose. So what can I say? It's all part of that resilience building, and, getting to understand the real world doesn't just hand out sweeties.
Is there anything, obviously joking about the fact that you were 8 years old, but is there anything from your background that sort of influenced the way that you viewed the world and the things that you wanted to sort of pursue?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Yes. I mean, my parents lived in the flat above the Conservative office. They then bought their own house when my sisters came along. And it was a struggle. They obviously got a mortgage, but they had to borrow money from friends and family to get a house. My mother had started her own typing and duplicating business, as it was then, and was operating out of a shed in the back garden of this house. My father gave up his job, cashed in his pension, and bought a small printing machine and rented a basement in Tottenham somewhere. And together they tried to create a printing business. And it was tough. It was hard because no one was there to support you. They were living entirely on their own wits. And I just remember how hard they worked, and presumably they were under quite a lot of stress. There's a lot of risk in with 3 young children, mortgage, giving up everything and trying to make a living doing typing, duplicating and a bit of printing. And that stuck with me, even at that young age. And by that very, very hot summer of 76, which obviously you're way too young to remember, my father was going to work at sort of 2 or 3 in the morning because his business was now in a shed with a steel roof, and he had to finish work by 10 o'clock in the morning because otherwise all the ink just turned to liquid. All those things struck me that you have to make your own way in the world. No one was giving you a handout. And just anecdotally, and this is not a dig at anyone, but so we were living in a house, and I remember getting my first bike, and it cost 10 quid from a second-hand shop in Leytonstone. And it was fine, I was very happy with my bike. But it was the time of the chopper bikes, and I really wanted a chopper, but there was no way we could afford it. But the child living opposite in the council premises had got his chopper bike, and he was the envy of everyone. And there's something in that, and I'm not digging people out for being dependent or having assistance from the state, because I'm a centrist and I believe that people need support when they need it. It just was something that stuck with me, how hard my parents were working, and they were struggling.
Obviously, talking about stuff that's influenced you and influenced your politics, I wonder if there was a point where either politics became personal for you, or when that sort of key decision was where you decided to throw your own hat in the ring.
Yes, I mean, there are a number of things that stick out as being moments where I thought, this is not right. One of them my parents started a printing business, as I explained, and I worked in the printing industry for 25 years before getting involved in politics. But one of the jobs I had in the printing industry was for a large financial printers up in London, and they were producing documents that had very tight timetables on them, had to be with underwriters or insurers, bankers, etc. by a certain time. And I remember a proof that we had produced, I'm 20 at this time, and it had to be in the offices of someone by a certain time, or there would be a fine to pay, and it would run into many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds for the business. It was a big operation. And the transport department refused to deliver it. Said they were at lunch. And I said, well, I'll take it over then. Because it literally was over London Bridge. if you do that, we'll all go out. We won't. We'll go on strike. You're not a driver. You're not in the delivery team. And so the proof sat there while they all ate their sandwiches, and the company got fined. Well, I don't know the exact figure, but a significant amount of money because the proof wouldn't be delivered and couldn't be delivered. It was ready, but they wouldn't do that. And that struck me as something that didn't seem right, and probably cemented my view that I'm a conservative, and right of centre, and believe that it speaks for itself, really. We're getting involved in politics. It's supposed to be about me.
Do you think you could have been any other party? Obviously, you grew up in a sort of conservative household, as it were. Was there any sort of rebellion sort of festering in you that I could break away and, I don't know, become a little bit?
No, I don't think so. If anything, I've probably become more centrist over the years rather than less. But no, I think I was always a conservative. I am a conservative to my core, so I won't be leaving to join any other party either, which some of my colleagues sadly have done.
Yes, an interesting time. I wonder, obviously, talking about your time working within the printing sector, how did you find that? What sort of thing did that involve? Talk to me a little bit about that. That's a sort of unique.
So I joined the family business, the printing industry, in 1984, and then it was a very analogue and trade-based business. By the time I left 25 years or so later, it was professionalised and digitised, and that was the transformation over the 25 years I was there, from doing everything manually to being quite technology based. And I was instrumental in the business of keeping the company up to date almost. I wouldn't ever say we were cutting edge, but we were certainly early-ish adopters of technology. And we ended up as a reasonable size, 7 presses, 50 staff, 24-hour day operation. But of course, an operation of that size needs a lot of work, and that over the same period changed. The kind of work that was coming through the door, the availability of it, changed with technology. We needed bigger and bigger jobs and bigger clients to keep those machines busy, because people were able to do a lot more themselves at home, or they had completely cut out having things printed and were doing it digitally, sending PDFs backwards and forwards, producing stuff at home. And there was no job too big or too small for us. We could do everything and did do everything. So it was an interesting time to be involved in the business, but it became increasingly challenging, which is sadly why the business is no longer around. The printing industry is not what it used to be. Lots of printers have gone, sadly, to the wall. Big famous names who had histories going back hundreds of years have gone because the ground shifted from under us.
When did that sort of business come to an end? Or when did you stop being involved in it, rather?
Well, I stopped being involved in it in 2010 when I got elected, but the business itself folded in 2016. And it was a sort of a managed wind-up. It did have to go into administration, but we could kind of tell that the writing was on the wall, and so tried to do the best we could to make the impact as little as possible, and we did finally fold. And by that time I wasn't involved directly, I wasn't a director, but my sister and mother and wife were all still involved. And so my wife was made redundant after 30 years working for the family business, which was sad, but that's the nature of it. But we fight to live another day, or we live to fight another day, I should say.
What was that like? Obviously, you say you weren't personally involved in it. Obviously, your family members involved in that business, and your family is involved in printing for decades. So that must have been quite a sad time.
It was a sad time, but my mother, as I said, started the business way back. 1966. So it was 50 years, the business has been going 50 years. But she was instrumental in winding it up, because she's a pragmatist and a realist, and recognised that the business was not viable, that it couldn't just carry on. And if we'd tried to keep it going, or she'd tried to keep it going, it would have crashed out. As it was, we managed to almost bow out, not quite, but so she's a realist. And it was sad, but my sister now runs a small digital print business. My wife's gone on to do lots of other things, and my mother's still interested in politics, so everyone's fine.
You've obviously spoken a lot about your family and your parents being involved in politics. Obviously, you got involved in politics. When you made that decision to get involved in the political arena, was there a lot of support for your family, or were they like, what are you doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I started really getting involved in the early 90s, and was standing for local council seats. And the first seat I stood in, interesting, I stood in Debden Broadway. Loughton, against a guy called Stephen Murray, who is Len Murray's son. And Stephen and I are friends, have been for a very long time. And I stood against him in his seat, Labour stronghold. He got 1,200 votes and I got 200 votes, exactly as predicted. No problem at all. That's what was expected. Funnily enough, when my daughter first stood, because she's sort of toying with the idea of getting involved in politics, she stood against Stephen Murray. She got 200 votes and he got 1,200 votes. So, you never know. Give it another few years, you may be talking to her on one of these podcasts. But I stood in a number of seats which I had never expected to win. Sometimes I worked really hard trying to win them. Sometimes I was just a paper candidate. And eventually, after probably 8 years, 2002, I got elected as a councillor to Epping Forest District Council. And that really was the start of my journey to where we are today. It was a great experience. I really enjoyed being a councillor, but it became obvious that if you want to make significant changes, you need to be in a position of greater influence, and that's what motivated me to stand for Parliament. And so I stood in 2005 in Ilford South, and then eventually got selected and stood in South Basildon and East Thurrock in 2010 and subsequently won. But yes, the support from the family was unwavering throughout that. So yeah.
You talked about standing in a number of different seats. I wonder, just how does that process work? Are you looking for a seat? Are people coming up to you and saying, "Oh, Stephen, do you fancy giving this a go?" How does that work?
So at council level, obviously, anyone interested in politics needs to get involved in a political party, and you've got to appreciate that all political parties, no single party is ever going to fit anyone perfectly. So there's always a bit of compromise. But you get involved in a political party, and then if you are interested in representing the public, getting involved, being an elected representative, you make that known, and then people within your own party will start looking at you and considering whether or not, they'll ask you to do a seat you can't win. You might do that once or twice. Then there may be more winnable seats where there are selections where you put yourself forward and pitted against other people, and eventually, hopefully you will get yourself selected in a seat you can actually win. And that was my journey. So, it was, at the time I was doing this sort of between early 90s to early 2000s. It was very much a team effort locally as a political party. We were trying to get control of Epping Forest District Council. We needed right people in the right place, and everyone was working as a team. So I never felt particularly confrontational. It was much more of, let's see where we can get Stephen in, do your apprenticeship here, and then we'll get you into a seat where you can win at some point. And that's what basically happened.
You mentioned your friendship with Stephen Murray. And I wonder if that's something that came about during that election cycle, whether that was after the election cycle, and how that sort of comes to be that you're friends with your former opposition.
Well, he and I were both school governors together for a fairly large secondary school close to where I live, and I can't remember the exact timing. I think at the time I just had put my name forward for this seat I wasn't going to win. And I'm a great believer in only criticise the individual, the person, if there's something really that needs criticising. So by all means criticise their policy, but not the person. Very much what I did when I stood against him, so there was never any animosity between us. And I think within a year I was sitting on the same governing body with him, and I had some very interesting experiences as a school governor. There were the existing management, the existing administration was trying to make some staff redundant, which didn't seem particularly fair or necessary. And so I got involved in trying to work out how the finances of the school could be restructured so that this wasn't necessary, which I did. Stephen was one of those most grateful, not that he was necessarily under threat of redundancy, but most grateful for the work I did, and actually asked if, it was probably at that point we became closer friends. And he still walks past my house fairly regularly because he's a local councillor here, and he will occasionally knock on my door, certainly when I was in Parliament, and say, I really thought the point you made about X, Y or Z was very valid, which I think is quite nice. Our politics are worlds apart, but I hope he thinks I'm a decent chap, and I certainly think he is. So That's really, politics can be brutal, but it shouldn't be about the individuals.
You talked, just obviously speaking about that specific example and maybe jumping ahead a bit to your actual time in Parliament, I wonder if there were people on sort of different sides of the debate that maybe you got on well with, or you would consider a friend as well.
Well, yes, it's really interesting. You don't really make in my view, many friends in politics, because certainly within one's own party, everyone has got an eye on their next move. And so, while I do have some friends in politics on the Conservative side, some of my closest friends are actually, well, two of my closest friends, one's in the SNP and one is Lord Viscount Stansgate, Stephen Benn, because of his interest in science and technology and mine interest in science and technology. We've had a great friendship over the last 15 years, I think, and regularly chat and exchange texts and things. So again, it's a demonstration of the person trumps the politics. And as I say, Stephen is a friend. So I've got friends, obviously, in politics, but the close friends are harder to find.
I sort of jumped ahead there and talked about your time within Parliament. I wonder, because you talked about the fact that you worked for a printing business for a number of years before you get into the sort of political arena. I wonder, people often talk about the fact that there's professional politicians and people that spend all their lives focusing on politics and not actually working in the real world, so to speak, not my words.
Yeah, no.
But I wondered, do you think that was a useful thing that you had going into it, that you had worked in a completely different sector for that time?
Yeah, undoubtedly. The printing industry, because of its very nature, it's diverse in the trades that are employed within the industry, and therefore you are dealing with a whole range of people of all different backgrounds. And so I think as a grounding and as a training for politics, it's really useful. And certainly being a small business, not a corporate entity, you are dealing with, friends with, colleagues with, people from every kind of background, walk of life, and every set of circumstances. And often a small business, the employer, is the fourth emergency service for their employees. They're the ones who can often sort out problems that no one else can, because a business, and this is not unique, is dependent upon its staff. So you need happy staff who are happy to come to work and are engaged with what you're as employer asking them to do. Helping them out and helping them solve some of their problems is paramount, key to making sure that your business is successful. And so as a background into politics, I think that was really helpful.
Obviously you get elected. What is that sort of feeling when you finally can add, I guess, MP to the end of your name?
Yeah, it was scary. It was I'd been working for it for so long. So as I said, I stood in 2005 in Ilford South and had started that journey in 2003. And then I'd spent 3.5 years getting ready for the 2010 election in South Basildon and East Thurrock. Just part of your life of campaigning, knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, attending events. And then suddenly it is the full-blown election campaign in a key target seat that we had to win if we were going to form a government. And even during that campaign, having done an election campaign before, it was all just normal. And then it's that moment on the night at the count where you see your ballot papers being counted and that your part is bigger than everyone else's, and you realise that you are going to be a member of Parliament, that your life is going to change. You're not going back to the office on Monday, you're going to go to Westminster. And yet, after the count and the results are read out and you're handed an envelope by the returning officer and it says, turn up here at this time where you will be inducted. And having been, and that was a life-changing moment. And so having been to Parliament on quite a few occasions prior to that, as a visitor, the moment you walk in with those two letters MP after your name, you do feel that incredible sense of responsibility, that this is now your place of work. You are now representing the 75,000 electors who you represent, and the 100,000 in total constituents for South Basildon and East Thurrock, and it's up to you to try and do your best for them. And that's a huge responsibility, one of which I welcomed and I hope I lived up to. But it was quite a life-changing moment. And then there's all sorts of firsts, from being elected to getting your office to asking your very first question in Parliament to making your maiden speech. All those things come fairly rapidly. It's bearing in mind, of course, back in 2010 we also didn't have a government.
Yeah, I was going to.
to start with. We weren't really sure what was going to happen. We eventually formed a coalition, but those early days, it was very, very uncertain. And all the time, now you've got a new laptop. That's one of the first things they give you is a laptop with an email address on it. And suddenly there's this tsunami of correspondence. But who knew you were going to be elected? And the answer is, well, they knew someone would be, so they're now all directed to you. And so dealing with those, getting one's office set up, employing staff, all those things take a little while. But it's, and then it all settles down a bit and go off on recess and try and take stock of the change that has been your life.
How do you deal with, obviously, if you win the election, you're now an MP, you're no longer doing the job you were previously doing. If you lose the election, you go back to your day job, you're doing the day-to-day. Like, how does that work? Are you just selling, like, you're working, I guess, for the family printers? Like, You're saying, just FYI, give me like a couple of months, I might not be coming back. Or, like, what's that discussion?
But basically, yes. Obviously, being a family business and having a supportive family, and it being a key seat, there was an expectation that I should win the seat, though nothing was guaranteed. And so it was people expected me not to come back to work on the Friday. And during the election campaign itself, I'd obviously arranged, everyone knew that I wasn't going to be around the majority of the time for the 5 or 6 weeks. That said, I was able to pop into the office and sort stuff out. They were doing my printing for the election after all, so I would go in and help with my own printing and some others as well, on and off. But
Did you get a discount?
Sorry?
Did you get a discount? Is that allowed?
Yeah, I think I probably did. It was all the printing in the run-up to the election. Over the 3.5 years campaigning before actually getting elected, I probably put out 1 million pieces of paper, and I'd certainly got a big discount on those. I was looking for spaces on sheets of paper where I could put a leaflet in and get 10,000 of those run off without it really costing anything, and then we'd get those out. It was a benefit having a printing company, I can tell you. I could win a seat.
Yeah, still going. I guess like still today, leaflets from politicians are still like a major way that operates, and social media has taken off rapidly, but they're still there.
Yes. I still think the leaflet is the best form of communication, and all I say is it has to survive the 3-second test, which is literally from the postbox or the mat into the recycling. And as long as they know who it was who contacted them, what their name was, then it's job done. If they read it, all the better. But as long as it said, my name, Stephen Metcalfe, Conservative, then that's done it. The problem with social media is it's so controlled by algorithms, you may only see the parties or the candidates you're already interested in, which doesn't necessarily give a broad spectrum of choices to people.
Without making this political or about any political party, obviously you were an MP for, I guess, the duration of the sort of 40 years of the Conservative coalition to begin with, and then the different governments after that, for want of my memory. It was obviously like a crazy time with we'd just come out of the financial crash, with the Brexit debates that seemed to go on and on and on, and then COVID, various international wars. How do you sort of summarise then 14 years with all that sort of crazy stuff going on? Unprecedented stuff. Unprecedented is probably the word of the last maybe a decade at least.
Well, go back to 2010, as you said. Coalition, electoral reform referendum, the 2015 election we didn't expect to win, Brexit. You reeled them off. It was, I used to joke, could we just have a sustained period of boredom, please? Or can we have some less excitement? And it never stopped. It just never, ever stopped. We got into a cycle of elections every 2 years, different prime ministers, different governments, and then COVID. And that threw us all. And then, more chaos after that. The most stable time in my 14 years was the coalition. That first 4 or 5 years up until 2015 just had a sense of stability about it. And I think, we certainly haven't got a sense of stability now, and I think that's common knowledge. I don't think that's a politically charged statement. What everyone, I think, wants is some stability, some normality, and just to get on with their lives. Hopefully that will come soon, at some point.
Talking about your sort of time within Westminster, I wonder if there's anything that surprised you, and also stuff that may surprise people that may be listening to this as well.
Yes, I suppose that an early memory something that struck me was that it became very obvious that the purpose of opposition is to oppose. Now, that might sound stupid, but it almost is that. Their job is to give the alternative view, and then people can, regardless of how sensible that is, and then people can make up their own minds. So that struck me. The other thing I think is interesting is, having had the opportunity to visit the States and look at their political system, I'm pleased with the way our chamber operates compared with Congress. So we are allowed to interrupt each other, make statements about what someone else is saying. And I know that some people get frustrated by how lively, should we say, Prime Minister's question time can be. And yet it's the most watched point in the parliamentary week. And because of that, it's a bit like the FA Cup final, the Prime Minister's question time. Both teams have got their best 11 out on the front bench, trying to score points off each other, and the fans behind jeering and cheering on. And yes, it can appear to be uncontrolled and uncontrollable. The reality is that it acts as a release valve. There are things that you can say in the chamber about your political opponents that you can't or wouldn't say outside the chamber. And the benefit of this system in the UK over Congress is that outside the chamber, and this is the second point that strikes me, is how collegiate you can be with people from other political parties. So the same people you could stand up and physically say, the honourable member is talking complete nonsense. The figures show this, this and this, and really they should have checked their facts. The sort of, could be construed as quite rude if you were saying that to someone in the pub. That stays in the chamber, and outside the chamber, you're in a committee and you're working together for a cause that you both share belief in, and then you'll have a beer or a glass of wine later. And it's that release valve that the chamber can be the melting pot for politics, I think is really healthy to allow people to get rid of that political angst and work together on things outside the chamber, which is actually where most of the work takes place, whether it's select committees, all-party groups, pressure groups, where people are trying to make real change and persuade the government to adopt legislation that will hopefully enhance people's lives.
You talked about some of them groups there. I know you were sort of drawn towards the sort of science and tech side of things, and I wondered if that's something that sort of suited your background. Like, how did you find that?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a frustrated scientist and always had a very keen interest in science and technology and things. And if you think about it, the printing industry, an industry transformed by the power of engineering over the 25 years I was there, and computerised, all those sorts of things, technology. So yes, having been elected, I was looking for a sense of purpose, because now you'd think, hang on, he's just been elected as Member of Parliament, why haven't you got a sense of purpose? And the reason is, you're just firefighting all the time. And I wanted a fixed point, if you like, to say, I'm doing some work on something of national importance, rather than just firefighting my emails and responding to, and helping constituents, which is all very important. But I wanted that sense of achievement. Because having come from the printing industry, end of every day, you've got a big pile of paper with ink on it that you hopefully sell to a satisfied customer. There's your sense of achievement. You're doing something. In politics, that's harder. So I joined the Science and Technology Committee, and really that defined my 14 years in Westminster. I became chair of the Science and Technology Committee for a while, between 2016, 2017. I chaired the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee. I established the All-Party Group for Artificial Intelligence. I was the former government envoy for engineering. You can see a pattern of those things. And science and technology is one of those policy areas, bizarrely, that sort of crosses the political divide. There's very little division on what we should be doing and how we should be doing it as governments. And again, I've made some good friends from other political parties because of their keen interest in science and promoting the UK as a great place to do science, to invest and do research.
I wonder if you had, I guess maybe the question is, how ambitious were you once you got into Parliament to try and, I don't know, get a seat around the cabinet table and things like that?
Yes, probably not ambitious enough to start with. I was keener on making sure that I was dealing with my constituents. So there were lots of people manoeuvring very early on to try and get junior ministerial roles or PPS roles and things, and I was keener to make sure that we were responding to all the email contacts we were getting, that we were doing our best, doing visits and things. So my focus was on the constituency as well as on my select committee work, and it became clear to me that I liked the idea of scrutiny more than being a junior minister, where you are told to do what you think, told what you can say, you have to carry the collective responsibility, you can't criticise the government, you can't say or do anything, and yet you have to go out there and defend at times the indefensible. And so that's when I decided I really wanted to become a select committee chairman, because you get recognition in the House, you get some status, you're taken seriously, but you're only responsible to yourself and your committee. You set your own work programme, and you didn't have to therefore be gagged if you wanted to speak out. And I quite liked that, and that's really why I moved towards that scrutiny role. That said, I did have government roles, whether they were trade envoy or was a PPS for a while and the government envoy, but I sort of abandoned my ambitions to be a minister fairly early on the basis that I quite enjoyed having the freedom that comes with not being a minister.
I wonder what you see as your sort of the highlight of your time as an MP, and maybe any regret that you might have from that period.
Well, I suppose in highlights locally was, people will never have heard of this business, but it's called Visteon. It was a spin-out from Ford. It was a Ford parts manufacturer set up on its own. It failed, which meant that those who had been transferred out of Ford with their gold-plated pensions were now losing a significant proportion of their pension in this new entity. I spent 4 years campaigning with others to get Ford to recognise that they had a responsibility to their former employees. Some have worked for Ford for 30 years, only worked for a matter of months for this new entity, and had lost 50% of their pension. And so we carried on. We did it in a pleasant's not the right word, in a courteous way. We campaigned, but we carried on and beat them down, and Ford did eventually settle and compensate their former employees. So that was something I was quite proud of. And in Parliament, I did get a private member's bill through, which means that there are now digital pathways available to create lasting powers of attorney. A small thing, I know, but have got legislation through. I am a legislator. So, there's lots of other things that I'm proud of that I did. Some of the reports we did, some of the influence I had as chairman of the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee, which is different from the Select Committee. We were very keen that as part of the Brexit negotiations that science was well represented around the table, and we brought the science community together with the Royal Society, wrote a document, a paper on this subject, and I kept punching the bruise about how do we recognise that top-class scientists move around the world, they bring their teams with them, and if we want the research to be taking place here in the UK and we want to benefit from it, we need to make sure that governments of whatever colour recognise the importance of having a visa system that supports that ambition. So, things like that.
Are there any sort of regrets on the flip side? I was just talking about some of the stuff that you've achieved.
I didn't win in 24, but that's what it was. No, not really any regrets. I became a trade envoy in the early part of 24, and I was planning my visit to the countries, which was Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, and Panama. And I was built relationships with the various ambassadors and teams, and was looking forward to my visits to these various countries. And then, of course, the election came and watched that, so I never got to go. But no, I haven't really got any serious regrets. I thoroughly enjoyed my 14 years. It went so quickly. That's the extraordinary bit. It just vanished like that, and then suddenly here I am, released back into the wild.
I'll come on to that shortly. I wonder, you just mentioned the 24 election. What was that like? What is that process like? Was it sort of a writing was on the wall situation for yourself?
Yeah, I genuinely, when the morning of the day that Rishi Sunak called the election, I swore blind that we were not going to have an election. Sat there in the chamber. We all agreed, all this little group of us sitting there, no, he's definitely not calling an election. Sure enough, he did. And then started the shambles that was the 24 Conservative election campaign in all its various guises. But I still thought I was going to win. I had scrape home. And it was about halfway through the election campaign when Nigel Farage announced that he was going to stand, having said he wasn't, that you could feel a change on the doorstep. People kept saying, you're going to vote for Nigel. And I've got all sorts of stories about, well, no, you're not. He's not standing here, etc. And there's one lady I was speaking to, came to the door laughing, who, had been a solid Conservative supporter, and said, after a various conversation, look, you're great. You've helped me, you've helped my daughter, you've helped my granddaughter, you've resolved all our issues. You're a really great member of Parliament, but I'm voting reform. And at that point, it was pretty much. And I came home one evening during the campaign and said to my wife, I think there's a chance I could actually come third, because obviously Labour were in ascendance, Reform was picking up our votes, and sure enough, that's what happened. I came third. And the runoffs, the longest recount in history, were between Labour and Reform, and I was out of it. I had to hang around for the 24 hours until the vote was declared. So it was difficult. By the time we got to the count, I kind of knew it was not going to be successful. You never give up hope. You go in thinking, I could be wrong. But no, sure enough, I wasn't. And it was...
How does it work? We talked about sort of going into Parliament as a newbie. How does it work on the other side? Do they just say, thank you for your time, see you later?
No, you don't even get that. Not to start with, you just go home. Well, yeah, went home at 5:30, 6 o'clock on the Friday morning, being told there would be a recount starting again at 2 p.m. that Friday, knowing that I was 2,000 votes off the pace and definitely wasn't anything to do with me. You go home, you get a couple of hours sleep, you go back, watch the recount knowing that you're going to lose, get the result declared, and after 14 years wasn't even given the opportunity to say anything. Didn't get to say thanks to the electorate for the 14 years or whatever, just told no, we're just hearing from the winner, off you go home. That's it, silence.
How do you feel in that moment?
Well, you come to terms with it. I'm a big boy. But there's no doubt it was sad. I actually went from there about 6 o'clock, getting emotional now, went to the pub to meet my closest friends and my wife straight from the count, and I did shed a tear there, and it was the first one I shed because it was just, they gave me a hug. Yeah, it was emotional. It still is, really. It still is. Because it's somewhere, it's a cross between, I didn't realise this at the time, but over the next few weeks it's sort of sunk in. It's a cross between a bereavement and the breakdown of a long-term relationship. Somewhere between sorrow and anger. How could they do this to me? Could they get rid of such a marvellous MP as me? And the sorrow that, I didn't win and I lost my job and now I've got to try and find something else to do. And then after a little while, the party did get in touch. There are some really sad times in the following week where you have to go back into Parliament and you're taken through how you're being made redundant by Parliament and how you have then got to go and speak to all your staff because you employ them. I mean, this is a terrible system. So I had to make all my staff redundant myself, even though they're actually technically employed by Parliament. But because they're not, because it's the ridiculous system, I employ them. So I have to make them redundant and sit down with them each and say, thanks, off you go. This is what you're going to get in redundancy. And your notice period is from this to this. And you will no longer be working for me as of this date. So that's tough. You've just lost everything, potentially. And now you've got to go and do it all to your staff. But they were all great. I had some fantastic staff and they knew this was coming, and it was a sort of you could go through the correct process, but they knew I had no choice, etc. But it was really, it was those moments going into Parliament, clearing out your office, being told, what you have to do and things. And then, the party does, I'm not sure, the party did get in touch, but not really in any meaningful way. And then that's it, you're on your toad. Get on with it. And so that's where I am now.
Is it like if you leave sort of a quote unquote normal job where maybe you can steal a pen and some post-it notes or something on the way out?
Yes, I suppose. Yeah, you get to clear your office out, so you take the odd memento. No, not really. It's not like a normal job in the sense you don't see it coming in the same way. Maybe I should have done. Maybe that's my fault. I didn't see it coming. I'm not sure what difference it would have made. You still fight till the end. It's not like a normal job because under normal circumstances there'd have been a process about discussing whether I was going to be made redundant, as opposed to, a 5-week election campaign and bosh, you're out at the end. But that's the system. I'm not complaining about it. It is what it is.
It'd be quite a good way to end like a normal job if you just go around to the local area and ask people what they think of you.
Exactly. I think I should carry on.
It's obviously been, I guess, the best part of 2 years since that election. Yeah. What have you been up to? What are you doing? What have you sort of switched your attention to?
I think having lost, straight off, I did a CV, first CV I'd ever done, I think. Well, no, in 40 years anyway. Did a CV and started immediately to try and find a job, which was not terribly successful. a number of people approached me and said, this might be of interest. There's a process here. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do. That was part of the challenge. So I took a step back, reevaluated what I wanted to do, was approached by an organisation I'd worked with through the science and technology stuff, and I am working with them. I do 2 days a month consultancy with them, which is great, on a retainer, and helping them with communications and engagement. So that gave me an anchor, and I think what I've done is basically semi-retired. I've decided to semi-retire. I have started to draw some of my own private pension. I have got another job opportunity that's starting in the next month. That's again probably 2 days a month. I've taken on a school governorship. I've now taken on the chairman of a board of trustees who manage a quite high-profile park down in Thurrock. And so with that and my other bits and pieces, I feel my time is well used. And it's allowed me, and for the first time in, a very long time, 20 plus years, to decide what I want to do with my time. And so I've gone back to one of my hobbies that I enjoyed for many years, up until probably early 2000s, which was amateur theatre and musical theatre. So I'm currently rehearsing for Oklahoma, the musical. So this will be my third musical with this particular company. And I'm doing a play in June. So, because I could never commit to the rehearsal schedules with politics, whether it was as a councillor or certainly as a Member of Parliament. And now the evenings are mine, days are mine. So I see my grandchildren more regularly. I pick them up from nursery or school. I can do my amateur dramatics. I can pursue the things I want to pursue. And so therefore, life is pretty good. The balance is great. I've got some paid employment. I've got some paid work. Rather than continuing to save, I'm drawing down on pensions and using my investments more wisely that I've got, my savings, and I am happy and semi-retired.
You talked about obviously amateur theatre in Oklahoma. Do you sing as well? Is that?
I do, yes, after a fashion. I've been known to sing. I sing and act. I'm going to draw a line at dancing. I have done some dancing in the past, but I think I'm too old for that now.
I have to say I've never seen Oklahoma, to be honest, but I wondered what if there was anything that you can sort of relate to from your sort of political career with the musical.
Not so much Oklahoma, but the one I did before this, which was in December, was Come From Away. I don't know if you know Come From Away. It tells the story of a small town in Newfoundland who on the 11th of September 2001 had 7,000 unexpected guests when all the flights across the Atlantic were diverted to this giant airport next to a small town, and the townspeople rose to the challenge of looking after them. And I played the mayor of this town, and basically I played myself. I drew upon all my time as a councillor and as a Member of Parliament and all the firefighting and crisis management you end up doing in those roles. And so just as I was the mayor of this small town called Gander, and basically played Stephen Metcalfe being a councillor or a Member of Parliament. So on that occasion, I did draw on my experiences.
I think I found our first clip for social media on that.
You can find it on Facebook, the Loughton Operatic Society.
We couldn't get a song at all. Is that? I can't persuade you to. No, worth a try.
No, I don't think the microphone's up to it.
Thank you for your time. I wanted to end on a quick fire round of questions. So I'll just run through these and we'll try and get through them as quickly as possible. Appreciate I've gone slightly over. So let's start with, are you an early riser or a night owl?
Night owl.
Night owl. One word colleagues would use to describe you.
Nice.
One word friends would use to describe you.
Dependable.
Dependable. Football or rugby? Mac or PC? I don't know if that's still a relevant question. Mac. Fish and chips or roast dinner?
Fish and chips.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
House of Commons or home?
Home.
Change of question. House of Commons or the musical theatre?
Oh, musical theatre. Not much difference, I know, other than the singing.
And are you a TV series person or a podcast person?
TV series.
TV series. Do you have a favourite musical or TV show or film or whatever?
No, what's in the moment? I mean, I've just rewatched the first two series of The Capture, and the third series of Capture. Absolutely fantastic, and that plays into my AI and tech stuff. So that was, absolutely fabulous series. If you haven't seen it, do watch it. But no, it shifts along the way. Game of Thrones, again, is one of those things I keep going back to because it's just magnificent.
And I guess there's always parallels people may make about that and a career in politics as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. If you want a favourite musical film, it's got to be Grease. I once played Danny in Grease a long time ago, 40 years ago. Yeah, great. So it's been with me a long time, this musical theatre nonsense.
And now you get to live it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephen, for your time. But thank you very much for joining us on the first episode. It was great to speak to you, and look forward to going to see Oklahoma at some point in the near future.
It's a great musical. It's been fabulous. Thank you very much.
That was my conversation with Stephen Metcalfe, a fascinating look at the personality behind the political career and the experiences that shape life in public office. If you enjoyed this episode of the Personality Politics podcast, be sure to follow and share it with others who are curious about the human side of politics. And don't miss our next episode, where we'll be joined by current Labour MP Margaret Mullane. We'll continue exploring how personality, background and perspective influence the way politicians think, act and lead. Thanks for listening, and remember, in politics, personality is never just personal. See you next time.